This time it's 5 war machines, motorcycles that went to war. The First World War saw the introduction of the motorcycle as a weapon, whether it's for dispatch riding or carrying heavy machinery and guns. But it was during the Second World War that the motorcycle really came into its own, with armies on both sides making tremendous use of them. The matchless G3L. The G3L was a development of the pre-war G3 and was in design a fairly classic British big single, being a popular choice for off-road and competition in the interwar years, and so it was an obvious choice for Maxus to put forward as part of the bidding process for a universal motorcycle for use by the British Army. Initially the bike lost out to the lightweight parallel twin 350 developed by Triumph, but would find themselves back in the frame again when the Triumph factory was destroyed in the Coventry Blitz in November 1940. And so it was that in late 1941, production of the first matchless G3Ls began. Early models made use of girder forks, but these were soon replaced by the telehydraulic suspension units, which were BMW-inspired telescopic forks. And given the importance that the British Army placed on off-road ability, this made the G3L one of the most popular machines with British dispatch riders, with around 80,000 units being built for the Allied forces during the war. The G3L used a 4-stroke single-cylinder unit for 344cc. It had a bobbin stroke of 69 by 93 and with a compression ratio of 6.5 to 1 made a claimed 16 horsepower at 5,200 rpm. And with a dry weight of just 156 kilos or 344 pounds, this was a very capable off-road machine, and one which in one form or another would survive in the AMC range through until 1960. The BSA M20. At the outbreak of the Second World War, BSA had been Britain's largest motorcycle manufacturer, although in the First World War they had not actually produced any motorcycles at all, and had shut down motorcycle production completely in favour of the production of firearms. In the Second World War, however, BSA did continue to produce some motorcycles, although their main focus remained on firearms. The development of the M20 began in 1937, and the machine originally being intended for the haulage of sidecars. During the interwar years, BSA had supplied the army with a range of V-twins, and so the M20 was offered for evaluation by the British Army. But the War Office specification had asked for a lightweight and nimble machine. The M20 was none of these things. It was slow and had very poor ground clearance, and so initially was rejected. But the bike was rugged and easy to repair in the field, and so after some modifications, the bike was finally accepted by the Ministry of Defence, but was perhaps Britain's least capable all-round dispatch machine. But BSA's huge factory could supply it in huge numbers, so while it may have been far from perfect, it was actually the most numerous motorcycle used by any military during the Second World War, with 125,000 machines eventually being produced. After the war, most of these were discharged and became popular sidecar mounts, although some would remain in service with the British Army right through until 1971. The engine was a single-cylinder side-valve 4-stroke unit with a capacity of 469cc and a bobbin stroke of 82 by 94. Peak power was just 13 horsepower at 4,200 rpm, and top speed on a good day was around 60 miles an hour, although comfortable cruising speed was nearer 45. But ultimately, there's no doubt about it, the M20 was not an especially great motorcycle. But what the M20 proved, if anything, was you don't need to be great to be successful. You just need to be solid, reliable, and of course available. The Harley-Davidson WLA. Now the WLA was a fairly standard V-twin Harley-Davidson, 45-degree V-twin, side valve, and of 750cc. The machine was based off the earlier WL civilian model and began production as a military bike in 1940. and was for various reasons perhaps one of the most important motorcycles of its era. The bike came in two essential forms. The WLA was the standard US Army version, around 70,000 of which were produced, and the Canadian Army version, the WLC, of which around 20,000 were produced, making it one of the most common machines on the battlefields of World War II, and by American standards it was by far the most numerous. The 45-degree V-twin used flat heads or side valves, and had a compression ratio of around 5:1, which allowed the machine to run on poor quality fuels. But unfortunately it did mean that power output was fairly low, at just 25 horsepower at 4,500 RPM. And while this was handling more than most British mounts of the period, it was also much heavier and nowhere near as capable off-road. The engine capacity was 45 cubic inches or 739 cc's, with a bore and stroke of 69 by 96 mm or 2.75 by 3.8 inches. The transmission used a 3-speed hand change system with a foot clutch. Dry weight was 540 pounds or 240 kilos. On the plus side, the bike was very comfortable with a low seat height and could cruise comfortably and reliably all day long. The machine was predominantly used by the US Army, but there were also small numbers in service with the Soviet Army and even a few with the British. But the British found that the poor ground clearance and heavy weight didn't make it the best off-roader. And of course there was the controls, which were very different from those that British riders were used to. As a consequence, they were often given to people who could drive cars because they were more used to using a foot clutch. In the Pacific theatre, it would also face the Riku, ironically a Harley-Davidson built under licence in Japan. Post-war, the machines were used widely by civilians and became the basis for many bobbers and choppers in the 1950s and early 60s. The BMW R75. Now, while the Germans did make use of some lightweight machines from TWN and DKW and so on for basic transport and dispatching, as well as the truly bonkers NSU Kettenkrad, a weird half motorcycle half tank intended to haul aircraft and bombs around muddy fields. But by far the most famous motorcycle used by the Germans in World War II was the BMW R75, a 750cc flat twin designed to haul a sidecar over rough ground with its driven sidecar wheel. Early versions were side valves or flatheads, but this was soon replaced by an overhead valve version, which of course offered more power. Although the side valve version would be built by the Russians under licence, even before the outbreak of the war. The engine ran a very low compression to cope with poor quality fuel, so even though it was overhead valve, it only made 1 horsepower more than the Harley-Davidson. It was a 745cc engine with a bore and stroke of 78 by 78. The machine weighed in at a hefty 930 pounds or 420 kilos with a sidecar fitted, so top speed wasn't exactly rapid. And somewhat surprisingly, the machine was actually less favoured by the German army than the equivalent Zundap, and was planned to be replaced, but a combination of the Allied bombing campaign and low resources meant the production never reached the targeted 20,000. The Triumph 3SW. Now, in military terms, Triumph had made its name during the First World War with the trusty Triumph, the Model H. This had been the most popular machine used by British dispatch riders. And so at the start of the Second World War, Triumph were there again, ready to produce an all-new bike, especially for the British military. This would be the parallel twin 3TW, an overhead valve 350 unit which was chosen by the British military as their preferred motorcycle. However, on the night of the 14th and 15th of November 1940, the German Luftwaffe launched a massive raid against the centre of Coventry, completely destroying the Triumph factory and taking with it the 3TW. And much worse still, some 554 Coventry residents. The Triumph staff collected what machine tools were still workable and moved them to a site in Warwickshire, before later moving again 4 miles down the road to a greenfield site in Meriden, where they would remain until 1983. However, while still at the Warwick site, by June 1941 machines were once again rolling off the production line. The first of which was the 3SW, a simple side valve 350cc unit. This would soon be supplemented by the 3HW with its overhead valve motor. The 3SW's engine was of 343cc with a bore and stroke of 70 by 89. Compression ratio was just 5.3:1, meaning that the machine produced a fairly modest 12 horsepower or 8.9 kilowatts at 4,800 RPM. But there was a 4-speed foot change gearbox, something very common on British machines by that point, but still much less common on US or European machines. The machines were modestly sized 7-inch drums, but weren't especially powerful. But given that the bike only weighed 317 pounds or 143.8 kilos, at least it was fairly light and didn't have too much to stop, and that little engine didn't have too much to pull along either. Later in the war, the SW would be phased out in favour of the overhead valve 3HW, while the company began development of the machine which would eventually be the TRW side valve parallel twin, although this would not see production until after World War II had finished. Whatever bikes are collections of bikes, would you like to see us feature in a future video? Maybe get a bike we can use for a test ride? Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.